I spent $35,000 to join my family's dream trip to Europe, and I thought it would finally be the moment where I felt like part of them. I imagined mornings in Paris, cafes with my mother, dinners in Rome laughing with my siblings, late night walks through cobblestone streets where, for once, I wouldn't be the outsider looking in. But the reality began to crack before the plane even took off. At the airport, as I rolled my suitcase up to the check-in line, my mother turned to me with that familiar, absent-minded smile she always wore when she was about to say something cruel, disguised as innocent. "I forgot," she said casually, like she was mentioning the weather, and in that second I felt my heart stumble in my chest because I already knew what she had forgotten. And if I was right, it meant I wasn't going anywhere. I froze in place, clutching my passport so tightly, it bent in my hand. All around us, people bustled with excitement, kids dragged stuffed animals through the line, couples kissed before security. It was supposed to be my turn to have that. Belonging, laughter, a seat at the table. But my mother's voice, calm and careless, cut through the noise like it had so many times before. "I forgot to add you to the booking," she said, almost laughing. It slipped my mind. The tickets were already so expensive. I stared at her, unable to speak, because this wasn't an accident. I had wired her the $35,000 myself, savings I'd scraped together for years, money I thought was buying me a seat with them. But there was no ticket in my name, no itinerary that included me. Just like always, I was the afterthought, the daughter. They remembered only when they needed something from me. My brother shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my eyes, and my sister pretended to fuss with her phone. They knew. They had always known how this would play out, but no one said a word. And in that moment, standing under the harsh fluorescent lights of the departure hall, I realized something sharp and undeniable. This wasn't just about a trip. This was the pattern of my whole life, repeating itself one last time, daring me to either accept it or break it forever. I wanted to scream, to make a scene, to demand the truth in front of everyone, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I just stood there replaying every sacrifice I had made that led me here. I had sold my car, drained my savings, canceled plans with friends, all so I could finally share this one grand experience with them. My mother had told me again and again, "Don't worry, just send me the money, I'll handle the bookings. Trust me." And I had trusted her, like I always did, even when every part of me knew better. I glanced at the airline desk, the rows of screens glowing with flight numbers and boarding times. Their names were on that list. Mine wasn't. My mother didn't look guilty, she looked inconvenienced, like I was a child throwing a tantrum because I wanted candy. "Don't be dramatic," she whispered, lowering her voice so others wouldn't. "Here. It's just one mistake. You can fly out tomorrow or the day after. We'll meet you in Paris." But I knew the truth. If I walked away now, there would never be a tomorrow. They'd go on without me, just as they had at every family event, every holiday, every gathering where my seat at the table was mysteriously missing. My father hovered nearby, adjusting his jacket, his eyes flicking to me for half a second before sliding away as if acknowledging me would make the shame real. My siblings, already halfway checked in, clutching their boarding passes like golden tickets, avoiding me as though I carried the weight of their own guilt on my shoulders. And that was when the memories crashed over me. The birthdays where they forgot to buy me a cake. The Christmases where my gifts were an afterthought. The countless times I'd been told to wait, to sacrifice, to give just a little more so everyone else could have what they wanted. $35,000. That wasn't just a trip. That was my freedom fund, my safety net, my future. And now it was gone, swallowed into their luxury hotels, their first-class upgrades, their designer shopping sprees. I swallowed hard, blinking back the sting in my eyes, because I refused to let them see me break. If I was going to fall apart, it wouldn't be here, not in front of their smug faces and not under these airport lights. Something inside me hardened instead. It was the moment I understood that the girl who always gave, who always forgave, who always stood quietly in the background was gone. If they wanted to treat me like an outsider, fine. But this time, they would regret underestimating me. They thought they could erase me from this trip. What they didn't know was that this was only the beginning of the end. For them. I didn't chase after them as they rolled their glossy suitcases towards security, laughing at some inside joke I wasn't meant to hear. I stood perfectly still, my hands trembling but my jaw clenched tight, watching as my family disappeared behind the sliding glass doors, their designer luggage tags swinging like badges of privilege. My mother didn't even glance back, not once, as if she had already scrubbed me from her mind the way you cross out a mistake in a ledger. That was her way. Erase, dismiss, pretend. But I couldn't erase the sound of her voice when she said, "I forgot." Like my existence was nothing more than a smudge on her perfect family portrait. And in that moment, a sharp clarity cut through me. They didn't want me there. They never had. I had been their financier, their scapegoat, their shadow, useful when they needed money or someone to blame, but disposable the second I wanted to belong. I dragged my suitcase back through the terminal, each wheel clattering over, the tiles like a drumbeat of humiliation. People brushed past me, parents tugging children, couples holding hands, travelers calling out flight times. But I was invisible, as I had always been in my family's eyes. By the time I reached the exit, the adrenaline had burned away, leaving only a hollow ache in my chest. I sat on a cold metal bench outside, staring at the planes roaring overhead, each one carrying someone to a destination they had chosen. And then my phone buzzed. A notification. A string of charges hit my bank. Account, designer boutiques in duty-free, a luxury restaurant reservation already prepaid, first-class lounge access for 4. My money, my $35,000 bleeding away into their indulgences while I sat alone in the parking lot. It was like watching my trust burn in real time. But that sting of betrayal didn't break me. It forged me. Because if my family had made one mistake that day, it was believing that I would stay quiet, that I would swallow this like I had swallowed every slight before. Not this time. I opened my banking app, my hands suddenly steady, and began documenting every charge, every transfer, every receipt. If they wanted to forget me, I would make sure the world remembered exactly what they had done. I stayed on that bench long after their plane had taken off. The sky darkening above me, the air filled with the hum of engines and the smell of jet fuel. I kept scrolling, screenshotting, recording everything. Thousands of dollars drained in minutes. Perfume, champagne, luxury luggage I never touched. They hadn't just excluded me, they had used me, milked me dry so they could play out their fantasy of being a perfect family abroad while I was left behind like discarded baggage. But the thing about betrayal is that once you finally see it clearly, you can't unsee it. And I saw now that my family's love had always been conditional, transactional, and I had been the fool funding it. I thought of every time I was told, "We're family, we take care of each other," while I was the only one paying the bills. I thought of my mother's voice, dripping with fake innocence every time she said, "Don't worry, we'll pay you back." Lies. All of it. And sitting there, with the weight of years pressing down on me, something inside me shifted permanently. I wasn't powerless. Not anymore. I still had access to every transaction, every bank record. The money was in my name. The accounts were tied to me. And if they wanted to treat me like an outsider, then I would show them just how cold it feels to be locked out. By the time I got home, the plan had already taken shape. I called the bank, filed disputes on the charges, and locked the cards they had used. I gave precise details, times, amounts. The fraud department didn't hesitate. They flagged the activity immediately. My family thought they were sipping champagne above the Atlantic, but by the time they landed in Paris, their cards would be frozen, their reservations canceled, their indulgences ripped from their hands. I imagined my mother's face when she marched up to the hotel desk, only to be told their suite was no longer available. I pictured my siblings scrolling through their apps, finding nothing but red declines and blocked payments. And for the first time in my life, I smiled. A small, sharp smile. The kind that comes when you finally stop begging for a seat at the table and start flipping it over instead. This wasn't just revenge. This was reclamation. My $35,000 wasn't gone. It was coming back to me, piece by piece. But the message I was sending them, that would last longer than any vacation. The next morning, while they were likely still asleep in some cramped airport lounge, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and my laptop open, combing through every account I had ever linked to them. Bank transfers, shared cards, even. The utilities that for some reason always ended up in my name. The deeper I dug, the uglier it got. Years of small favors and temporary loans that were never repaid. My signature on bills I hadn't run up. Subscriptions I didn't use but had been paying for. It wasn't just $35,000. They had been bleeding me slowly for years. And I hadn't wanted to see it because admitting the truth would mean admitting that my own family saw me as nothing more than a wallet. I created a folder on my desktop labeled evidence and filled it with PDFs, screenshots, account statements. I even pulled up old texts where my mother promised she'd pay me back next month, or where my brother swore he'd cover the next holiday. Lies written in black and white. And as the folder grew, so did my resolve. I wasn't just going to get my money back. I was going to make sure they never used me again. By noon, I was sitting in a lawyer's office, explaining everything with my evidence spread across the table. The lawyer didn't look shocked. If anything, she looked like she'd seen this story 100 times before. "They exploited you," she said flatly, clicking through my files. "But you've documented everything beautifully. You have a case." My stomach flipped at those words. A case. Not just my anger, not just my pain, but something concrete, something legal, something that could put boundaries between me and them once and for all. That same afternoon, I filed formal disputes with the bank, began the paperwork for fraud claims, and signed documents to legally separate my finances from theirs. I was done being their scapegoat, done being their ATM. I wasn't their forgotten daughter anymore. I was the woman who was about to cut off their lifeline. And as I walked out of that office into the sunlight, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't another charge. It was a furious message from my mother. "What did you do? All our cards are declined. Fix this now. We're stranded." I read it once, twice, and then put my phone face down in my bag. For the first time in years, I felt no urge to respond. Let them feel stranded. Let them feel forgotten. It was only fair. By the time their second wave of messages poured in, angry, frantic, dripping with entitlement, I was already beyond caring. My brother sent me a voice note shouting about how embarrassing it was to be turned away at a Paris hotel desk. My sister typed paragraph after paragraph accusing me of being vindictive and jealous because I wasn't there with them. And my mother, always the master manipulator, tried to switch tones. "Sweetheart, we can sort this out when we get back. Just unlock the cards. You don't want your family stranded in a foreign country, do you?" But her words no longer had power over me. I remembered sitting alone on that cold airport bench while they laughed their way through security. I remembered the years of being the forgotten one, the girl whose birthday gifts were an afterthought, whose sacrifices were dismissed as duty, whose love was never enough unless it came with money attached. And I finally understood. They weren't my family, not in the way family is supposed to mean. They were users, opportunists, a collective that thrived on keeping me small so they could take up more space. And I had just slammed the door shut on all of it. I didn't answer their calls. Instead, I drafted an email attaching the evidence folder and sent it directly to my lawyer and my bank representative with a clear subject line: formal complaint, financial exploitation by immediate family. It was cold, clinical, exactly. The opposite of how they had always treated me. Emotional, guilt-ridden, dramatic. This time, the facts spoke for me. By the third day, my lawyer confirmed that temporary holds were placed on their access to accounts tied to my name, and the bank was processing refunds. My money wasn't just coming back, it was being clawed back from the very hands that had tried to erase me. And with each update, each document signed, each confirmation email, I felt lighter, stronger, more alive. They thought leaving me behind at the airport was the end of the story. They had no idea it was only the prologue to their downfall. On the fourth day of their vacation, the tone of their messages changed again. The fury had burned itself out, and what replaced it was panic laced with desperation. My father, the one who had always stayed silent while my mother orchestrated everything, finally wrote, "We don't have access to cash. We can't book anything. Your mother says you've done something with the accounts. Please just fix this." For years, he had pretended not to see, not to hear, not to notice the way I was drained. But now that he was forced to notice, he sounded like a man standing outside a locked door, banging to be let in. My siblings, too, began to crumble. My brother sent blurry photos of himself in a crowded hostel, saying they couldn't even find a decent room. My sister texted that she was humiliated when her card was declined at a boutique in Rome, that the clerk looked at her like she was a fraud. And through all of it, I stayed silent. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't reveling in their discomfort. I was simply done giving, done rescuing, done carrying the weight of their entitlement. At night, I lay in my own bed, the hum of my apartment quiet around me, and for the first time in years, I felt peace. I didn't have to wonder when the next demand would come, or how much I'd have to give up to earn their fleeting approval. I had chosen myself, and that choice was intoxicating. Meanwhile, my lawyer sent updates. The bank was siding with me. The evidence was overwhelming. The $35,000 was being credited back, piece by piece, and soon I would have every cent. But the money, as sweet as it was to reclaim, wasn't the real victory. The real victory was the silence. The kind of silence that comes when you finally stop chasing people who only ever run away. My mother's last message came at 2:14 a.m., her time. "You've ruined this family. When we get back, you'll regret what you've done." I read it twice, then pressed delete. No reply, no fight. Because the truth was simple. They hadn't ruined me by forgetting me at the airport. They had freed me, and they would never understand how much stronger I was without them. When they finally returned from Europe, it wasn't with souvenirs or glowing stories. It was with bitterness etched into their faces and a kind of quiet rage that filled the room when they showed up at my door unannounced. I didn't invite them in. I stood in the doorway, my arms crossed, my lawyer's business card sitting on the counter just behind me like a shield. My mother tried to push her way into the conversation first, her voice sharp and accusatory. "Do you realize what you did to us? We were stranded, embarrassed, treated like criminals." I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I simply said, "I know exactly what I did. I protected myself." My father cleared his throat, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him, but still unable to say the words I had waited a lifetime to hear. My brother muttered something about betrayal, my sister about family loyalty, but none of it landed anymore. They couldn't guilt me because I had finally stripped away the illusion that their version of family had ever included me. "You stole from me," I said, each word measured, steady. "You erased me from your trip. You erased me from your lives, and you thought I'd pay for the privilege. That ends now." My mother's face twisted into the familiar expression she wore whenever she realized control was slipping through her fingers, half disbelief, half fury. But I didn't give her the chance to claw it back. I handed her a sealed envelope. Inside was a letter drafted by my lawyer, outlining the fraud investigation, the repayment plan, and the consequences if they tried to access anything tied to my name again. Their gasps were almost satisfying, like the sound of a door locking. From the inside, for once, I wasn't begging them to see me. I was telling them where the line was drawn, and I wasn't moving it. They left that day without the victory they came for, muttering threats, throwing glances over their shoulders like they still believed they could intimidate me back into submission. But the truth was, the daughter they thought they could control was gone. In her place stood a woman who had finally stopped waiting for love that would never come, a woman who had turned their betrayal into her liberation. As I shut the door behind them, I felt the weight lift for good. My life was mine, again, and they would never touch it. Weeks passed, and for the first time in years, my phone was quiet. No endless demands, no guilt-soaked pleas, no emergencies that somehow always required my money or my sacrifice. At first, the silence felt strange, almost like walking through an empty house where echoes still lingered, but soon I realized it was freedom. I poured my energy into myself, into work I had put off, into friendships I had neglected, into simple joys like cooking dinner in peace without dreading a call that would ruin my night. And with each day, the distance between me and my family grew wider, not just in miles, but in meaning. They had lost their grip on me, and I knew it was driving them mad. I heard through distant relatives that my mother complained to anyone who would listen, painting me as ungrateful and cruel, claiming I had abandoned them in their hour of need. But what she left out of her story was the $35,000 she had stolen, the years of exploitation she had orchestrated, the deliberate cruelty of erasing me from the trip I paid for. And when cousins or aunts reached out, hesitant, testing the waters, I didn't defend myself with tears or long explanations. I simply said, I set boundaries. If you can't respect that, then don't call me. And most of them went silent. 2. Proof of how deep my mother's influence ran. But I didn't crumble without them. I thrived. My accounts were clean, my credit restored, my lawyer assured me the bank would finish refunding the last disputed charges within weeks. And beyond the money, I felt stronger than I ever had. I no longer measured my worth in whether or not my family let me sit at their table. I built my own table, in my own home, on my own terms. And then, one night, months later, an email arrived from my mother. No subject line, just 2 sentences that revealed everything. We're selling the house. Your share will be handled by the executor. Don't contact us again. For a moment, I stared at the words, remembering the airport, the bench, the sting of betrayal. And then I smiled, because for once, she wasn't erasing me. She was acknowledging what she had tried so hard to deny. That I had a share, that I was owed something, that I existed in the ledger she could no longer manipulate. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The silence was my answer. And it was louder than any scream I had ever swallowed. I didn't go to the closing of their house. I didn't stand in the lawyer's office with them. And I didn't chase anyone down for what I was owed. The executor sent the paperwork, I signed, and within weeks a wire hit my account. Clean, undeniable, legally mine. It wasn't about the amount, though seeing the balance swell with money they could no longer touch was satisfying. It was about the shift in power, the proof that I was no longer the girl begging for scraps of affection or pretending not to notice when they used me. I had forced the world to recognize me, even if my family never truly would. Life after them was quieter, steadier. I found myself walking through farmers markets on Sundays, savoring the freedom to spend my money on things I wanted, fresh flowers, good coffee, a trip I planned for myself with no one there to erase my name from the booking. I started therapy, and week by week, I unspooled the knots my family had tied inside me for decades. My therapist said something that stuck. You kept waiting for them to choose you. Now you've finally chosen yourself. And that was it, really. The whole story. The $35,000, the trip I never took, the cold bench outside the airport, it wasn't wasted. It was the price I paid to finally see the truth. My mother had always wanted to forget me, to blur me out of the picture so her curated version of family looked perfect. But what she never understood is that forgetting works both ways. She forgot me at the airport, and I forgot her when I closed the door that final time. My brother, my sister, my father, they all became shadows in a story I no longer needed to replay. They could call me cruel, vindictive, ungrateful. Let them. I knew the truth. I had given them everything, and they had tried to take even more. But in the end, I took back the only thing that mattered. Myself. Sometimes I still think about the trip, about the Eiffel Tower glittering at night, or the canals of Venice, the places I thought would heal something in me if I could just experience them with my family. And then I realize I don't need them for any of that. I can stand under the Paris lights, ride a gondola in Venice, or watch the sun sink behind the Colosseum on my own, or with people who actually want me there. Because family isn't who shares your blood. Family is who saves you a seat, who makes sure your name is on the ticket, who looks back for you in the airport line. And if that's not them, then I'm better off without them. I spent $35,000 to finally see my worth, and I'd pay it again because it bought me something priceless. Freedom. So tell me, did I go too far or not nearly far enough?